I've just seen the story of John Wesley. John Wesley was the man who God called to set up the Methodist Society to promote the preaching of the good news throughout England. John Wesley was a man called by God with a particular task of to take and proclaim the good news openly in public out into the fields of England, outside the Church of England. What it reminded me of was a process that's been involved throughout history to do with having authority, getting ordination, starting a church, having church control, and that leading to power and money. And I just want to go over today the process that I see throughout history involved in this. In the New Testament, when Jesus Christ came, there was a temple in Jerusalem. In the temple, they had two high priests. They had scribes, they had Pharisees, they had Sadducees, and they had priests. And in that temple, the question that was asked of Jesus Christ was, who gave you the authority to do what you're doing? And it's not recorded that he did anything to show his acceptance of what was going on in the temple, other than in the courtyards of the temple he drove out the money changers for the sacrifices. And he said that this temple was going to be destroyed. In the synagogues that grew up at the time of Jesus Christ, and also after the temple was destroyed in AD 70s, you had a system of the leaders being called rabbis, and a rabbinical system of leadership grew up. They also ordained people and said, who gave you the authority to do this? Or how are you ordained to be a rabbi? In Jesus' time, he called his men disciples and learners. Even amongst his men were the same problem, where they argued as to who was going to be the greatest, who was going to be the one that would sit at the right hand when he received his kingdom. And he had to teach them that in his kingdom and amongst his people, it was not going to be as the Gentiles do, with benefactors and people who lorded over other people. If you want to be the greatest, you had to be the servant. Well, the disciples continued to follow Jesus Christ, and the church grew. However, the church became an organised church, and the Church of Corinth, as an example, they reported that they didn't accept even the Apostle Paul as being a genuine apostle, and they had set up their own apostles, the ones that they said had the authority to do the teaching. And of course, as history went on, the Roman Catholic Church was established with a Pope, Caesar, and somebody like Constantine would come and establish a direct government system as to who has authority and who has leadership and who can be ordained. As an example, in church history, later church history, examples are how the Catholic Church then continued to grow with a Pope and priests and bishops in control. And then, because the King Henry in England didn't want to go along with their authority and power, he established the Church of England. And the Queen or the King became the head of the Church of England, appointing bishops and priests, ordaining and authorising the power structure in the Church of England. Out of that church grew the Wesleyan Methodist Society. John Wesley was not accepted by the Church of England. They would not allow him to preach in their churches, forbade him to preach and proclaim the good news in their parishes. And so, as a leader, John Wesley established an order, a society, where he could teach the discipline of Scripture. But it wasn't that long before it became a church too. It was called the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church appointed ministers, an association of leaders, and became a big church who authorised those who were to be ordained as Methodist ministers. After that, there became a man like William Booth. And William Booth, who grew up in the Methodist Church, had a call from God to take the message out onto the streets and amongst the poor people and proclaim the gospel of God's kingdom to the poor. But the Methodist Church forbade him and said he did not have the authority or an ordination to do that task. And so the Salvation Army was started. And Booth trained people in the model of an army to go out into the public. But over the years, it's now changed, and the Salvation Army are calling themselves a church, the Salvation Army Church. And the Salvation Army Church has a general, has captains and officers, and has ordaining systems for who's authorised to do what, and has the authority to do within the Army Church. Another example in modern day history would be the Baptist system. The Baptists left England, Europe, and became known as Anabaptists. At the beginning, they were not Baptists. They just were people that believed in water baptism and following the commands of Jesus Christ for a disciple to get baptized. And so the Anabaptists were regarded as revolutionaries, certainly not ordained or authorized as ministers or priests. And then that association became known as the Baptist Church. And the Baptist Church set up a constitution, the constitution that authorizes and ordains Baptist ministers. And as they are trained and ordained, they have the authority to have power and be paid and money and have church control. And out of the Baptist Church, several churches like the Baptist Church then can join with other churches and have an association. And so in a city like Whangarei, you get the Ministers Association. And even the Ministers Association now has clear guidelines as to who is authorised to be a member of the Ministers Association. And they then are considered to have the authority to represent the Ministers Association. I see all this as part of a human nature plan that says that instead of having servanthood, or I will do my ministry as a service, the world system of saying I want power and control and eventually I need the money, and so it establishes a system of authorization, ordination. And to do that, it needs a name and calls itself a church. This is not what Jesus Christ set up. Jesus Christ is the church. The church is his body. He is the head. We are the members of his body. And we are not to make a ordination, authorization, control, power system, even though our human natures seem to desire to have that.